Well, happy Mother's Day, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you for coming. If you're a guest here, thank you for coming. My favorite, very favorite son and daughter-in-law is here. But I say that whenever, whoever is here. And Anastasia is here too. Thank you. And welcome, everyone. We are. Before I forget, let me mention about these baby bottles. There's no milk in them. These come from a place called Operations Baby Bottle. They come from Options Pregnancy Center. Now that's, ever since they've had that name, I've not been 100% happy with that name. But it's a good name, nevertheless. The options are not what you think. The options are the one and only option, which is to keep the baby. And that's what they are teaching young women.
Or adoption.
Just hang on.
It's an option.
There is options. But the first option is you got to keep the baby. If you don't keep the baby, you got no more options. Because that means you kill the baby. Now, I'm going to be preaching a message today that is about grace and love and restoration and forgiveness. But nevertheless, we want to spare the lives of these little babies. And so the option is that this Option and Pregnancy Center is basically out there to give the young women who find themselves in that situation an option. And the best option is keep the baby, and then if it's too much, if there is no means to actually raise the baby, give that baby for adoption to a beautiful family that is waiting. Thousands of people are waiting for a little baby. I am so behind this organization. They do such amazing work. Not only that, but I think we have a chance to be involved with them, not just with these bottles, but in many other ways. Because once they keep that baby, the mothers, the new mothers, they need all kinds of help. They need diapers, they need clothing, they need mentoring. You know, oftentimes they don't have their own mom to show them how to raise a child and how to care for a child. So it says right on here, every good and perfect gift comes from above. Would you agree? Kabumbi family? And we're waiting for one more baby right here. Good and perfect gift is growing right in that tummy. And we can't wait, right, to see. So you take this bottle home. We've only got 10, because that's what we took last time. And please put your name on there, because then I'll know who to look for when we need to get him back. We're going to bring him back before Father's Day. I don't know what date Father's Day is. About a month from now. Yeah, we got about a month, and then you bring them back, and I'll remind you next week as well. So help yourself, put your name down, and then what you do in here, you don't fill them with milk. No, not milk. No, not even pennies. No, try to fill them with toonies if you can. Or you can also there's paperwork in there, you can just put a check in there. If at the last minute you have to scramble. But please be generous to these people. They're so wonderfully inspiring to me for the work that they do. And I do love them very much. I know them personally. All right? And they know you guys as well through me. All right. We've been, first slide? First and last slide. We've been in the book of, I brought a Bible up here. We've been in the book of Joshua only twice, and now we're going to move on. What comes after Joshua? What comes after the book of Joshua?
Judges.
Judges. There we go. So we're going fast track through the Bible. And you should be right now, you should be at the end of Joshua and also at the end of Psalm 113. So some of you may now have a lot of catching up to do, if you haven't, right? But at least you're getting a taste of what's going on in these books just by being here on Sundays, if you haven't kept up. I hope you will. It's been transformative for my life in my spiritual walk with God and where I'm at. In Matthew, today I wanted to, as we think about mothers, and as we think about Mother's Day, and I just finished talking about the craziness of the world and how things can go so wrong at times, and how God is a God who redeems and restores and provides and makes everything new, full of grace and truth. I want us to focus on that because there's a lot of wars and battles happening in the book of Joshua. Joshua is a military leader. Joshua means actually Yeshua, like the same, if you pronounce it in Hebrew, Yeshua, and Yeshua is Jesus. So he's got the same name. There's some exciting stuff that I'm going to read and make some application for us. But there is a woman in there. You see this woman looking out the window. She's actually a prostitute. A prostitute. And she probably had, it doesn't say in the Bible. We know that she has brothers and sisters and father and mother and some other family members. But a prostitute in those days would automatically entail that she was a mother and she had children. And she lived in this city of Jericho, which was just on the other side, the very first city that the people of Israel were about to come into under the leadership of Joshua. And I'll tell you a little more about that. But anyway, she lived there, and she was the city prostitute. This city was so, I want to tell you about that so that when I read, I don't have to explain it, but it was so fortified. It was just like my hometown, Sapino. It had a wall so thick around it and tall that you could actually live in the wall. And she lived in the wall of the city. So it was like 30 feet, 20 feet wide wall. And inside the wall, people lived. And there was a window to the outside. And so she's a famous, perhaps the most famous prostitute. I'll tell you why. She actually had a change of heart somewhere and had faith in God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And she was restored. In fact, she was the first Gentile believer who was restored to the house of God, to the house of Israel. And so that is amazing. And that's not even the beginning. The greatest part is, if you take a look in Matthew, she was actually in the line of Jesus. Look at this. It says, that's why I needed the Bible. There's this guy by the name of Salmon, not Solomon, but Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. That's her. That's her. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. And now you can imagine where that goes. All the way down to Jesus. So the Bible is full of this. Like you go, that's a mistake. There's problems in this Bible. There are no problems in this Bible. This Bible is the history, is your history and the history of God, who it's not embellished in any way. It's the truth. We come from a line of people who have constantly walked away from God, and God has not allowed. He's left. He's chased. He's followed. He's drawn to himself a people through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the people of Israel, and then the beginning. You will see the message now as I read. It'll make more sense. This city is a fortified city. Joshua is a brand new leader of the children of Israel. Moses went up on the mountain and he died after he told them a lot of things. And Joshua sent 2 spies out before they crossed the Jordan, out to check out this land. again. And when they came back, and while they were there, they were actually, their life was saved because of this woman, Rahab, this prostitute. And there were promises exchanged, and there is lessons to be learned. I'll talk about that as we go along. But one thing that she told them, they said, this city, the people, the king, me including, are terrified. They have the fear of the God of Israel because they knew what had happened. They had heard the story of being taken out of Egypt in a supernatural way. They were actually set free. When Pharaoh chased them down, they actually, God actually parted the Red Sea and got them across and then drowned the whole army of Egypt. When they got to the other side, he gave them a covenant. He made a covenant with them. There's lots of covenants, but this one was, he gave them the 10 commandments. And they promised, we will obey. They didn't obey. He gave them the Sabbath. They didn't. Actually, the Sabbath, we don't know. I think they did observe it. They had to. He gave them free food for 40 years. The manna that was raining down all the time. And he loved them. He wanted them to come to him, but they kept on rebelling, and their hearts were hardened. And eventually, that first generation died. We're talking about the second generation. Rahab had heard about this. And so they said there is fear in the land of Canaan. All of Canaan was fearful of the children of Israel. They were visualizing. They didn't have CNN on-the-ground report. They were visualizing this powerful, amazing, crazy army that's just going to march and just walk over everyone. And because it seemed like that. But it was actually God who was doing it. They weren't all that great. In fact, they would have never won any battles were it not for God. That's the message there. So these spies come back. They report that they're so scared. Things are happening out there. The city is so fortified. It seemed penetrable. All kinds of things that happen, and it's thick. They actually made an agreement with Rahab about that they would spare her life because she actually saved their life. She hid them in the roof under the barley stuff, and then she told them how to escape out the window, and we'll talk about that in a second. They get back, and the Jordan is just to put it on top of this, the Jordan River, which is really, if you go look at it now, is like a little ditch. It's just not that big. Like we could just walk across it. But at that time, it wasn't. It was a much bigger river, and it was at flood stage, and there was no way to cross this Jordan. And so God did exactly what he did with the Red Sea. He parted. He didn't part it. He stopped the water from flowing, and he, the Ark of the Covenant, the priests went and stood in there. And while they were, as long as they stood there, then all the army and all the people, they crossed over. There was some. All of these people had not been circumcised. Circumcised is like, well, I'm not going to talk about it, but anyway, they were circumcised, which meant it was an obedience to what God had said, that all the children of Israel should be circumcised. Today, we are circumcised in the heart. That was a physical way of showing what spiritually happens to us today, that our heart belongs to God. All of their being belong to God. Their identity is God himself. And so they crossed supernaturally. They went through this circumcision of all the people of Israel, which was crazy. I talked about that last week, because the army was basically dysfunctional for about a week and vulnerable. They celebrate their first Passover, which the last time they did was 39 years before in Mount Sinai. They ate of the fruit of the land, and the minute they ate of the fruit of the land, the manna stopped. And now, I'm sure in their mind, they started thinking, wow, we have to plant, we have to seed, we have to water, we have to have faith that God doesn't burn it up by too much sun, and then we have to wait for the harvest, and then we have to go out there and harvest the stuff, and so I know what they're thinking. We want to go back. We want to go back to the desert. That would have been a natural thought. The manna stopped, and now, actually living in the promised land means that you're involved. You're actually doing the work that God has put before you. And so he provides the good weather, the dirt, the water, all the ingredients, the seeds. You need to plant them, you need to water. I mean, that was last week's message. I didn't cover Joshua, the very end of Joshua 5. And this will make a point that I will cover there. So leave that up there for now. But I'll talk about that in a minute. When I get it, mostly I'll talk about this at the end of the message. But I've got to hurry here. So, in Joshua, the last 3 verses, 13, 14, and 15, in Joshua 5, we see an incredible thing happens here. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and he saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Sorry, just 1 second. I need to do double pad here. Okay? He saw a guy. He saw this. What was this? Joshua was near Jericho. He looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand, and Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" And the answer here is a shocking answer to many of us, including Christians. He says, no. Over there it says neither, but on my Bible, but actually it was more like no. Wrong question. Wrong question. It would be like today, are you pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian? I mean, it's exactly the same question. And as Christians, we go, well, of course because I've done it. I am pro-Israel. God is pro-Israel. God is for Israel. And he is. And he is. But how has that worked out in real life? That's the point. And here, he says, no, he replied. But as a commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. So in other words, he says, I'm neither for one or the other. I am for the Lord, for God. That's who I stand for. What's that saying is that he's not for world righteousness. He's for God righteousness. We learned last week, if you were here, that these battles have to be won in the spiritual realm. There will never be peace on earth aside from God winning that battle for us on the spiritual realm. And it will be won. And there will never be peace in your own heart until you have surrendered, until you have broken down the walls of your life that are so fortified that you will not want God to come in. But he can tear those down. He can break those down in your life, and you'll hear him. It's not about a method or being powerful or being on the right side. It's about God and his plan for your life. And recognizing that he alone is the creator and the sustainer of life. And as Joshua realized that, at that moment, it says here, he fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" Now, at this point, he could have been an angel, he could have been anything. And the commander, and it says here, the commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." Who do you think said that before? When did we hear that before?
Ten Commandments were given.
Yeah, the burning bush that would never burn. And he said, "Moses, take off your sandals."
Yeah.
Can you see the repetition again? Who was in the burning bush? The commander of the army of the Lord. Same guy now. It's called a Christophany. And it's a vision of Jesus himself who appeared several times. Just in case somebody tries to tell you there was no Jesus until the New Testament. He was there right from the beginning. He's God. Can't be separated from God. And it says that Joshua did so. My point and why I wanted to share that is that self-righteousness is like filthy rags to God righteousness. And so, yeah, the armies of the people of Israel were maybe a little better than this guy in Jericho with the king and fortified city, but to God, filthy rags. Everyone must surrender to him. So, let me continue, because this is going to become a long message, even though I just got rid of about 80% of it in the back room. And because I'm enjoying this too much, and then maybe I better not talk too much and get to it. But it says, in Joshua 6, you can go ahead, let's read together God's word. Or you watch and I read. Joshua 6. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one went in. There was a curfew, in other words. This kind of represents a little bit like life before Christ. Like we get closed up in ourselves, right? Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho. I mean, if I'm always alluding to the spiritual application of this, remember, this was a real city in archaeology. You can go visit Jericho, where it was. So this is not just a story. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. The thing that you want to notice there, they haven't fought even one bit of battle. Not even one bit of blood. Not even one sword has been raised. And this guy, the commander of the Lord's army, said, I've given it to you already. You already won this battle. You got to understand that in the spiritual realm, when you go in Jesus' name, with the commander of the Lord's army on your side, he's not on your side, by the way. He's fighting the battle for you. Period. You have already won the battle. And he gives him these instructions, the weirdest things you've ever heard of. He says, march around the city once with all of the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram horn in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, and the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the walls of the city will collapse and the army will go up. Everyone will go straight in, right? If we had lots of time, we'd act this out now. We could do this here. I'd love to see this here. Because I'm telling you, there's a lot of walls that still need to be broken in our own lives. I got to come back to this stuff. I got to teach you more. I got to teach me more. But anyway, so Joshua, son of Nun, not a nun, but Nun, a guy by the name of N-U-N, called the priest or a woman, priest, and said to them, take up the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord and have 7 priests carry 7 trumpets in front of it. And he ordered the army, advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the Ark of the Lord. And when Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the Ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guards marched ahead of the priests, who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the Ark. All of this time, the trumpets were sounding. I mean, these guys are going into war. It's real war, right? But Joshua had commanded the army, do not give a war cry. Do not raise your voices. Do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shout. There's everything wrong there. I know there's people out there, they read the Bible, they tell you, this is how God is. Okay, and then this thing here is a perfect place. If you want to try to prove that the Bible is wrong, there's everything wrong here, seemingly. God has said, the priests do not go into battle. They're breaking what God said on the surface, right? The covenant, the Ark of the Covenant that's not what the purpose of the Ark of the Covenant is. It's not supposed to be marched around the city. What else? There was a few things. The Sabbath. If they went 7 days, that means they were working and fighting on the Sabbath day. In fact, it probably happened on the 7th day. I'm not going to teach on that, okay? Are they really fighting a battle? Who's fighting the battle here? God. God is fighting the battle. See, they're not breaking anything. There's no controversy here. But you're going to get people that read the Bible, say, I read word for word. They're going to come up with this problem. Because they don't have the Holy Spirit. They don't understand what I just told you. And perhaps there's somebody here that doesn't either. But they're not in a battle. God's already won the battle. Remember when he said, I've already given it to you. You just go do what I tell you. I mean, he said, okay, you got to visualize this. There's we must have started late. Okay, I'll plead we started late. I mean, the guy said, okay, we're going to march. You get the Ark of the Covenant, the 7 priests, the 7 trumpets, or whoever the horns there, and they weren't real trumpets. They were because they would use different trumpets. These were the shofar. Nancy heard me practice this yesterday. 7 of them. So they're going ahead, okay? And now, so these guys, okay, they're expecting this powerful army to storm the thing, climbing up the walls. They're ready. They just far enough so the arrows can't reach them, right? Okay, they're going around. There's this. Then there's this little box covered in the priest. They go all the way around. It's like quite a ways, about an hour walk. And then behind them there is some more guards, and then the whole army. And he said to the army, not a word, nothing. Boom, 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 boom. And the guys are watching. Wow, there's got to be a big plan. And then they go all the way around, and they come out the other side, and they just go home. They go home. And they said, oh, can't figure that out. Next day, they do it again. Next day, they do it again. Next day, they do it again until the 6th day. And then on the 7th day, and now they go around, and then they go around again. And then they go around, and they go around. Justus, you love it. Me too. That's all I want to do today. Amazing. But on the... I got to skip all that now. But on the 7th day, listen to what happened on the 7th day. They got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day, they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priests sounded that trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And when they shouted, the city and all that is in it are to be... Oh, did I just miss 17? Yeah, I missed something here. The 7th time around, the priests shouted, the trumpets blasted. Joshua commanded the army, shout, for the Lord has given it to you. Verse 17, the city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. Because, you may misunderstand something here, because she did something really good, right? No, because of God's grace. Because her heart was inclined towards God. That's the only explanation. But keep away from the devoted things. Okay, you got to understand that. Devoted things. Whatever, when he said everything belongs to the Lord, and they were to be devoted things, means they should be burned up. That's when you put your life on the altar. It says, you know, when God is saying, place your life, living sacrifice.
I beseech you by the mercies of God, you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is reasonable service.
Which is your act of worship and reasonable service. So this is the same thing. In the spiritual realm, it is a burning up, it is a purifying. What he's saying is that when you're declaring something when you're devoting something to the Lord, it is burned up. It's given away, it's done. It's all refined in the fire. So the gold, the silver, the metal, that didn't burn up. But that still belongs to the Lord, and it was to be put in the treasury. All right, I gotta. So all the silver and gold and the articles, verse 19, and bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into the treasury. Verse 20. When the trumpet sounded, the enemy shouted, and the sound of the trumpets, when the men gave that loud shout, the walls collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword everything living in it. So the destruction, this is part of the devotion, right? Men and women, young and old, cattle and sheep and donkey. Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out, and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brother and sister, and all who belonged to her. I have to fill in there that she was a mother as well, so she must have had some children. Although, just to place a little higher level of this, many of her prostituted or her fatherless children were probably sacrificed to the god of the moon, I think it was. Huh?
Molech.
Bolak.
Molech.
Molak?
Molech.
Yeah. And so who knows how many she had sacrificed. And here is God showing mercy to this woman. Then they burned the whole city down. Go to verse 25. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men. Joshua had sent spies to Jericho, and she lived among the Israelites to this day. But the story continues, and so as I conclude here, can you put that first slide back up there? I made a couple of notes this morning because I didn't know how to end this story. So last week we looked at a few things, and how to truly live in this promised land. Well, there was a lot of things we talked about last week, but the one that's smaller there is not because it's less important, it's because we talked about it last week. But worship always comes before warfare, both in the physical, but especially because warfare is always won in the spiritual realm first, then worship comes before spiritual warfare. And so, preparing for spiritual battle in the spiritual realm is always the most important. So going to the Lord and preparing ourselves, consecrating ourselves, repenting for what we've done, and coming before Him in a real, authentic way is how we win spiritual battles. That is the way we do it. And we don't win, right? It's God who does it. So the question there was God's plan or your plan? Well, you should ask that question to yourself even when you say, and many people today, it's almost become part of Christian language, is that God told me. God says. I distinctly know what God wants. Before you make sure, you should check it against God's Word. The only thing you have is God's Word. So if somebody comes to you and says, I don't believe the Bible, I don't think the Bible is accurate, and then says, God is telling me and I obey Him only, there's something wrong. That's all you got to know. Don't even get into an argument. There's something wrong. Because how do you know it's God? Right here. If it doesn't agree with right here, it's not God. Okay? So, God's plan or yours, test it. Test it, test it. And oftentimes, God's plan is your wishful thinking. Don't use that language even. Just pray about it. Think about it. If it's God's plan, it will come, it will happen. It will happen, actually. There is a place to speak out God's plan as well. But remember that Jesus is the one who redeems. We talked about that last week. He is the one who wins the battle. He is the one who tears down those walls. So, in number 4 there, take down the walls. There's a secular band that had a wall.
Another brick
Pink
in the wall.
Floyd, another brick in the wall. But I don't know if you got it from the Bible, but it was quite profound, because what happens is, it's exactly what happens to our life. When we start out in life, we think, wow, everything's great. We want to be self-sufficient. We want to be self-reliant. We want to conquer the world. And there's nothing that a man cannot do or a woman if he puts his mind to it, and we go and we become our own person. And the goal is that we can be self-reliant, never depending on anyone, because we can take control of our life. That's what we want. That's what we want. That's not what God wants. While you're doing that, you're putting walls around you. And at some point, those walls have to be broken down. Exactly what happened to Jericho. What's in there? You're putting walls. There's a lot of garbage inside, and now you're holding on. You know really that you cannot be self-reliant. Deep inside, you know that. And deep inside, you understand the condition of your own heart. You understand that. But on the outside, if you barricade yourself into this sort of facade, you think you can fool the world, that you can actually be self-reliant and you can earn enough money to do that, and you can be focused and leadership and all that. And what happens is that inside, though, you're dying. You can't do any of it. And so, you don't have confidence really. And you've got all these works that are like dirty rags to God. And deep inside, the one thing you can't answer is where you came from, where you're going. And the point is, what for you're living. And after a while, some very, very strongly fortified walls, the person inside just dies. Or they have to be broken down. And so, to break down those walls, there is vulnerability that has to take place in your life. There is transparency that has to take place in your life. There is trust that has to take place in your life. You cannot avoid it. You have to trust this message. And then, supernaturally, those walls will be taken down. I can't explain how Jericho came down. I can guess. I can tell you that it was an earthquake. I can tell you that they stomped so hard that, whatever, the mortar crumbled. But God did it. He took down those walls. And going with that subject, as I conclude right here, right now, number 5 is, and I just wrote this down about an hour ago as I was trying to figure out our message. Death and devotion leads to life. It's true. death and devotion. You look at this disaster of Jericho, and there was death, there was dedication of the stuff that was burned up, and there was some new life. New life. There was the promise of a promised land. There was the promise of a prostitute who would be in the line of Christ. There was greatness right there in the midst of the fallen city of Jericho, the corruption of sin. There was the promise of God's grace and mercy that would eventually lead to the fulfillment of what God had promised many years before, that He would send a Savior, that He would send the greatest one who could break down the walls of your life that are holding you back. God wants you to do that. He wants you to be set free. How do you live? How do you truly live in the promised land? Is it just a place where everything is provided for you and there's wonderful beauty and everything? Or is it a place where there's problems in the promised land? There's giants in the promised land. And there's walls in the promised land that need to be broken. Something must always die to have new life. A seed must die so that it can grow again and produce harvest. So to have new life, there is devotion. Devotion always comes with fire. Fire always refines. Wow. Let's pray. Father, just when we think we understand you, we see something new. We see your majesty, high and lifted up. And as we look up to you, Father, you calm our hearts. You soften our raising minds. You soften our hearts. You calm our raising minds. You already know what's inside our walls. I pray that you would make us vulnerable, Father, that you would make me vulnerable. I pray for a tearing down, not a building up. A tearing down first of all the things that are blocking us from you in all of our lives, in all of our homes. As we learn later, as you get to the end of Joshua, choose this day who you will serve. And Joshua said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Thank you, Lord. Father, I pray for that tearing down, replanting, renewing, restoring, redeeming. For that special growth in each one of us that can only come from you, Father. We cast off all of our achievements, all of our pride, all of our self-reliance. And we look up to you, Creator of heaven and earth. We worship. Father, I pray that your word would have its place in each one of our hearts as we understand you more and as you come and continue to restore us into your likeness. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
We're going to do last song, Change My Heart, O God.
Change my heart.